And we are Commissioner Wolf,
Here.
Commissioner Nemeth,
Here.
Commissioner Young.
Here.
And as I mentioned previously, Eric could not make it tonight, so he sends his apologies. And we are still hoping to fill the daily vendor representative spot.
All right, so the item C on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. So Stephanie sent that out for everybody in our packet. Could I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Jeff, great, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Great, thank you. So that motion carries. So the next item on the agenda is D, the first public commentary.
All right, so if anyone that's listening in would like to participate, this is your first opportunity to do so. If you choose to participate, you have up to 3 minutes to participate. And we would love it if you could share your name as well. All right, I am seeing a hand. All right, go ahead. And
hello, this is Carlene Gates. Hello, this is Carlene Gates, and I'm thinking that under attachment C, where it says discussion of annual stall numbers, it means are we going to discuss the 4 stalls? And if so, I would just like to add, one of the things we had in our letter last month was give the people an opportunity to earn the stalls. And some things that you might consider along those lines would be attendance times. Did they come 10 times on Wednesday and 15 on Saturday, or whatever numbers people might like to put in there? And also, I would be more difficult to count, but based upon also the need, which would involve the number of different products that they have to sell. So those are just a couple of things I was wanting to add in there with a little more detail. So I'll be listening. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carleen.
Thanks, Carleen.
Is there anyone else that would like to participate at this time? There is another opportunity later on in the meeting as well. Let's see. There is sometimes a lag, so we are waiting slightly. All right. I am not seeing anyone at this time, but that doesn't mean there aren't. With that said, I did get a few emails, correspondence from some people online. Okay. And I know Stephanie Willett is actually trying to get in right now. So let me coordinate multiple things for 1 second. First, while I'm doing that, Stephanie, if you can hear me, if you can either email me or text me your comment, I can read it. If not, I will try to respond in a moment. But with that said, I did have some commentary from 2 other vendors that I would like to share with everyone regarding as well this same topic of the 4th stall. 1 comes from annual vendor Jonna Field of Field Farms, and hers is very succinct and to the point. It says, "I am against giving any more vendors 4 stalls." And I have another one to share as well. This comes from newer daily vendor Carson Story of Storytime Treats. He is a chocolate producer, but let me make sure I can find his email before. All right, here it is. And he said, in conjunction with reducing the number of total vendors, which was already mentioned, increasing the market footprint for annual vendors might also make the colder months of the year more sparsely attended, as the big producing annual vendors are less likely to come and or need as many stalls during the cold months. I had a comment against giving a 4th stall to annual vendors. The year-round nature of the A2 market is one of the selling points for vendors when compared to many other markets in the state. So by increasing the footprint of the largest producing vendors, attendance could get smaller, which would further decrease the number of small vendors that currently attend and dissuade new vendors who might apply. Essentially, the small vendors would take a hit once in the summer with the reduced stalls available to them, and then again in the winter, since the big producers have pushed out many of the smaller vendors, but can't sustain that footprint size throughout the year. Trying to put in a word for the little guys, hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So Stephanie will email me hers and enter it at the end. And I'm seeing another raised hand. Hello, are you there? Would you like to participate? You can unmute yourself.
Hey, it's Stephanie. I figured it out.
It worked. It worked. Miraculous. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Sorry.
Great.
First time joining this. Hi guys, it's Stephanie with Food Track.
Hi.
Happy to be back. I just wanted to put in a quick comment about the 4 stalls. Speaking as a daily vendor, for us, it is difficult to get stalls where we want them and need them. And I think having vendors at a 4 stall would hurt us in the short term and the long term. From looking at how many vendors might possibly want a 4 stall, it looks like it would be, at least 7 or 8 that I know of, I think would be interested in expanding. And And just looking at the market in the middle of the summer, you know, I don't know where there would be room, first of all, to add that many more stalls. With current vendors, it was pretty full last year. We were filled up the parking lot and the sand lot. So there's that thought. But also, you know, for us, I think if more vendors were taking 4 stalls, we would be pushed longer in the season into more undesirable spots, like middle aisle or somewhere with less traffic, which can make the difference of hundreds of dollars on any given day. And then we would also be hurt long term because it would take longer for us to get a permanent stall since we're still daily. So we would be waiting probably a few more years at least to get that permanent stall. And you know, the problems we have with that is that we get bounced around, so it's hard for our regulars to find us. But also, like I said, we usually end up in areas that are less foot traffic as well. So I think for daily farms, if we want to encourage new farms to come in and do well, it's just more equitable to have vendors having 3 stalls, because then more businesses can have that chance and have it more quickly and more often in the year to be in good locations. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Is there anyone else who has not participated yet that would like to? Right, I'm not seeing anyone.
All right, then we'll move on to item G, which is approval of the minutes from the March meeting. And Stephanie sent those. So Jeff and Peter, do you guys have any changes?
No, I looked over it. It looks good to me.
Okay, great. So go ahead, Jeff.
I just said, yeah, it looks fine.
Great, thank you. So could I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Okay, and a second.
Second.
Great, thank you. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Great, and so the minutes are approved from the March meeting. And then we have the regular business part of the agenda. And so there's the general updates. And
All right.
so Stephanie, new vendors is the first item.
Yes. I'm just going to squeeze in a quick introduction for Hannah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No worries. I wasn't sure if she was going to attend or not, so I didn't put on it. But everyone, Hannah Bradshaw is our new assistant manager. She is assisting Alex and I, has been on the job a little over a month now, and we are very, very happy to have her with us. So Hannah, if you want to say hello, you can. Otherwise, people can come to market and meet you.
Thank you. Yeah, hi. If I turn on my video, the internet will crash at my house. But nice to meet you all, and I look forward to seeing you at market.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks for joining us, Hannah. All right, new vendors.
New vendors. So we've been getting a lot of interest of new vendors. We've also been conducting a lot of orientations for new vendors. Today, I did an orientation with the business formerly known as Fluffy Bottom Creamery. They have new ownership and are changing their name eventually. So that was today. Yesterday, I met with 2 farms that will be joining the Wednesday market to start, and they're going to see if they also want to do Saturday. So that's pretty exciting. But as of right now, we currently have 15 new vendors that are joining or have joined already in 2023. We still have maybe, a handful of spots left, but we're getting pretty full. We're sort of right back at that 120 number, which I think really is sort of the magic number in terms of how we can fit everyone comfortably. And within that footprint of 15, 6 of them are farms. There's 1 artisan, and the rest is a multiplicity of food producers, including, mobile food vendors that had changed to regular vendors, like Right Spice Kitchen is in that category. Sorry. All right. And then the rest, run the gamut from baked goods to salsa to, all things in between. We have a bunch of vendors producing in the Ypsilanti Growing Hope Incubator Kitchen, as well as the Washtenaw Food Hub. So that's pretty exciting, that we keep expanding our footprint within those incubator kitchens with a lot of our vendors already producing those spaces. But it's great to include those people. And again, all of these folks are, buying locally sourced ingredients. I talked to one of the bakeries. She was so excited about being able to source fruit directly from growers at the market. So that is what I have to report on that. And we are pretty much fully oriented with the exception of maybe one of the new vendors. But again, this is a rolling basis. We're trying to get it done as soon as we can, but we do have a high volume right now. And of course, that means not everyone is going to be accepted, which is the nature of the beast.
I have a question with that too,
Yeah.
as to if you kind of if you could have who we want, like what other things does the market holes that you see, or things that we're kind of running low on, or niches that really we're not really filling?
Great question. Top of the list, native plants, without question. We had our native plant vendor retire, and we have some people that are doing a little bit. For example, Shannon Brines does some native shrubs, edible natives. The Wilczewskis do have some native trees, and other people in the mix too, but we don't necessarily have a designated native producer. And that was something I definitely noticed last year. The demand is far outpacing the supply that we have at market. So if you go to our website, it has sort of like a list of things we need. That's at the top of the list. It would be nice to have a vendor that does some sort of nuts, other local products like that are also, tree nuts. Clearly is something that exists in Michigan that we just don't really have right now, especially locally grown stuff. I would say, Wolf Orchard sometimes does bring walnuts a couple weeks out of the year, English walnut specifically. And I think that Renegade Acres started doing black walnut last year, but in general, these are both farms that do it on a very small scale. Also, plant-based foods. We're always looking for more plant-based items across. We have a really great new fresh pressed juice vendor that started in the fall. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, like a sandwich or something like that. It could be anything under that umbrella. And, in terms of produce farms, if someone has something unique, if they're a really good fit, we will, I wouldn't say always bring on produce farms, but maybe 8 times out of 10, we'll bring on a produce farm if they apply. But I think other than that, we're pretty good on other items, unless there's something that I'm forgetting. But that's a great question.
Just one other follow-up. Can you tell us what criteria you used for the artisan?
Right. So the artisan, they have a product that we don't have represented at the market. They have a body care product that is neither soap nor the shampoo or anything we already currently have. It is also a business owned by an immigrant woman of color. So we're very excited. They've been doing the Plymouth Canton markets, and they're looking to expand, and they're very excited to join us, and they should be joining soon. Their name is Blue Lilac Skincare. So that was sort of the criteria in which, and partly we weren't sure if vendor Tiani was returning, and that's partly why we figured, there might be a space. Again, we're not sure the status for this season because, again, their business is so successful in their storefront, which is a great problem to have. It's fantastic. But that was the other reason why we figured, there might actually be an opening. But yes, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. That makes a lot of sense, Stephanie. So great. Thank you very much for that.
And, sort of another rule of thumb that we do is if it's somebody that's sort of like a chain or something that doesn't necessarily fit within our mission or where we go with that, we usually just don't consider it. I know there is one organization called Planted Detroit which has a vertical growing setup in the city of Detroit, and they're huge. They have like a staff of, I don't know, 50 plus people. They're in all sorts of grocery stores, and they do primarily microgreens and salad mix. And that's fantastic, but that is something we have an abundance of. And I really just wanted to make sure we didn't oversaturate the market with that, with a very large, very well-funded organization, when we have farms that have been with us for a while that aren't in that same position. So that would just be one example. There was another bakery that is like, it's the local iteration of a national chain. Again, that's fantastic, good for them, but that does not fit with market. So things like that right out the gate, we are not looking at. So
all of that makes perfect sense. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Right. And I know that was a question that came up as well during the producer subcommittee last week as well, like what is the type of criteria for everyone?
Yeah, those things would be great to put in the producer guidelines just for
right.
any future managers. Yeah.
Exactly. And just to give, I'm trying to open up this list here so I can give a little bit more specific information of the other character of some of these other ones. There is a popsicle vendor that does all local produce, that produces out of Eastern Market. We have a brand new houseplant vendor who makes their own soil mixes, does all of their own propagation, all of their own seeding. We have a shrub company, so drinking vinegars, also like a non-alcoholic mixer. We have a seed company, Nature Nurture Seed has joined us. We have another, I guess maybe it's more than 6 farms. I think it's more like 7 that have joined us. We have a Cantonese style egg tart vendor, so another sort of culturally appropriate food, and that's a producer as well in the Growing Hope Kitchen. And then the most exciting news, I think, of all is that Pilar's Tamales, a mobile food vendor, is rejoining us after a long absence due to the pandemic. So Sylvia, I spoke with her on Saturday, and she's going to be joining us both for market days and for the food truck rallies. So very exciting, because I know they were a staple of the past, and they will be coming back.
Great. Is Nature and Nurture just doing seeds, or are they going to bring some produce too?
Mostly seed, but if they have a lot of surplus of tomatoes or garlic, they're going to play it by ear.
Okay,
great. But yes, that is their plan, at least when the last time I talked to Mike.
Great. Good. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the next item is returning vendor invoices.
Yes. So invoices for the yearly stall and parking payments for annual vendors have been sent out and received. We've started to receive payment on those with the very early birds. The deadline is June 30th. The next step on that is we are going to assess the daily vendors that would like to pay yearly. And this is somewhat of a newer procedure, I guess is the word. Whereas finance, they really want everything to be pre-invoiced. Prior to me starting, they had a very different system for payment of daily vendors, where it would just be sort of like we were keeping track of it in the office, and we were just somehow sending the checks and information over to finance. But it made it very confusing for them because there was a lot of undesignated balances that got lost in the system and things of this nature. So for the second year, we are trying to also do invoices for daily vendors. And we're just finalizing right now details with individual vendors who want what. Part of it has been the holdup because of we're waiting for a lot of people to come back to market to talk to them in person. But that's our next step with the invoicing. And same thing, June 30th is the deadline for that.
Alrighty, great. Thank you. Next thing is the inspection process.
Yes. So this has been part of our conversation, which we will potentially go back to when we talk about the producer-only subcommittee report later. But I did want people to know that this is something we've been talking about. And specifically under this item was that I've streamlined a little bit more which inspector has which district. because before that we had our vendor Jan O'Neill, who lives very far away from the market, doing a lot of the inspections very close to the market. It just didn't really make sense. So Alex has been given the territory, I guess, which is all of Washtenaw County and any farms and greenhouses that are on the borderlands. So for example, New Boston is in Wayne County, but very close to Ypsilanti, lots of greenhouses there. Same thing with 2 Tracks now will be under the jurisdiction of Alex. It just made a lot more sense in terms of both where our inspectors were located, as well as where their expertise is. Whereas Alex has a lot of extensive experience with plants, being a former produce manager at Argus, amongst other things, as well as his role raising plants for the Agrarian Adventure. So he's very knowledgeable about that side, which is part of, and plus, sometimes it's good to get a second pair of eyes when we've had the same person in the similar operation for a while. And still on the table is a conversation of, do we really need to inspect artisans as frequently as other people, especially if they don't have any new products, if they're producing the same thing from year to year? Do they need to be, can we do theirs every 3 years, for example, as part of the questions that we've been having? But as I said, a lot of this conversation is implicated as well. If we talk about the producer only, are we going to change the schedule of inspection? Are we going to have additional inspections? What will this look like? But that's part of it. But specifically, that was the major update, was them having designated territory. So there's no confusion of, was so-and-so already inspected, and that people don't accidentally inspect them again. So.
Great. Thank you. Next is the events.
All right, exciting times. We are moving forward with a pretty full event schedule as of right now. We had CSA Day on April 1st, which was very well attended. From the vendors that participated, some reported that it was probably one of the higher sign-up rates that they had at a CSA Day type event in the past. So that was really great. That day was also hard because there were so many other things going on. There was a football game, it was Hash Bash, there was a library event, there was just all these things that day, but there was still a pretty good turnout for that. And also we had an info table up. So each vendor had their own setup, but then we had a table where we had all of the information from each farm and vendor, sort of like a one-stop shop. And we also had information about the City of Ann Arbor Employee CSA, which is going to be in its 5th year this year, with pickup at Wednesday Market. So that was exciting. First big kickoff event. Our next event coming up is Flower Day, which is the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, so May 28th. We are in process finalizing details for that. We have confirmed that the Pontiac Trailblazers will be providing live music from noon to 2. We are also hoping that OSI and other city departments can be present, talking about, No Mow May, 10,000 Trees Initiative, pollinator gardens, all these related things, as well as perhaps natural areas preservation and other people. And then, of course, reaching out to all of the participants from years past. And hopefully we'll see, but we would love to have the new popsicle person participating, or something like that, a light, sort of more dessert type snack instead of food is our goals there. But as I said, really just gaining traction. 2 main other events, and again, I don't really need to rehash all of this stuff, but the cooking demos are moving forward. We are getting a grant from Michigan Farmers Market Association to have a food safety piece added to it. We just heard from Edwell Wow this week that we know the first 3 chefs. They are all female chefs, so that's pretty exciting. And as of now, I don't want to say this is subject to change, but the cooking demos are going to be centered around, first one is asparagus, because that will be the May. The one in June is going to be peas, and the one in July is going to be zucchini as of right now. So, and more information forthcoming once we have all of that set up, because there will be 5 of those. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have our food truck rallies scheduled. We have one band already confirmed for the July rally. That is the band Ain't Dead Yet, which is a local Ann Arbor band, which was one of the bands in, I don't know if people saw that article a couple months ago about the music night that happens at Live, which was talked about in the New York Times as the, quote, hottest rock show in town, but everyone's above the age of 60. Yes. So they are actually from that, and they reached out to us. I think that they're a relative of Green Things farm as well. So that's exciting. We're still ironing out the rest of the details, but hopefully that we have a very, very full roster. We're really excited about the food truck rallies because not only do we have people that are returning from last year, we have also new people as well as people that are returning after a gap of a few years. So those should be pretty vibrant again events. Last couple of things, we're hoping to bring back story time reading for kids this year. Alex just met with a representative from the library yesterday. And not only that, the Ann Arbor Farmers Market children's book is out officially. So we were hoping to have maybe like a meet and greet with the artist and or read aloud of that book as part of it. So I will keep you posted with more info as we know a little bit more about the Storytime kids events that are coming back. But those will probably also be during Wednesday market. And I think that's it for now on events.
That's great. I love that the cooking demos are highlighting the seasonal produce.
Yep, that was the plan. And we want to make sure too that it coincides with when people have that for purchase. So you can get your recipe card, go over to the stall and get the ingredients that you need.
It's fantastic. Great. And then we have facilities and repairs.
All right. So last month or earlier this month, it all is blurring together now. We had a walkthrough with park operations, Scott Spooner, my supervisor, Josh, to identify areas where there may be crumbling concrete or the paint needs to be redone. And, you know, a lot of that is pretty standard, usual stuff. However, there is a larger issue that revealed itself once the snow melted. And there is an area of the market office where the stone is sort of crumbling. I'm not exactly sure how to describe, you know, the technical terms for it. But we have had the first assessment of, you know, they had to see is how bad is it? Is it affecting the foundation? I'm still waiting for the report on that, but they did do an assessment 2 weeks ago. And it's the area right as you turn the corner to where the trash and recycling is. I'm not sure if you've noticed that there's some sort of sand.
There's a huge gap.
Sand.
There's a huge gap under the foundation there.
Correct.
Like...
Yeah. And the sidewalk is sinking on that side. So, you know, this may be a larger long-term project to be aware of. But, you know, it was just ironic because when we did the walkthrough, there was still snow on the ground blocking that area. And then the next week, we're like, wait a second, this is a big issue. But they responded immediately. So we'll see how this plays out. Hopefully it's not too major, but, you know, got to catch it now before it gets worse. But everything else seems to be good with facility and other things. And, you know, a lot of this is just regular seasonal repairs. They're just waiting for the weather to get slightly warmer, probably starting around May, to repair the concrete and do the painting.
Okay, great. And then we're on to the next list of items, which is all the subcommittee reports and discussions. Right. So Peter, do you want to drive the bylaws discussion? And I actually have the document open so I can take notes if that's helpful.
Sure, yeah. And Stephanie, can you put it up on the screen too?
Yeah, just give me one moment to access it. Yeah, I was having a little bit of difficulty attaching it properly to the packet. So, you know, it's sort of
It
sort of
works. It's in there. It's in the official record.
in there.
It's there. So
I don't know where
that's
the
really,
blank pages came from, but
yeah, no, it's like this page
Yeah.
intentionally left blank, or
Yeah.
it doesn't say that. It should say that.
yes, Legistar is a very complicated program for what it does. We'll just say. All right, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So just to kind of refresh folks that we've been working on what our bylaws, just an update for our bylaws. They have been updated for about 10 years. So it's about time we looked at them, and kind of been discussing 4 main aspects of this. And it seems like from the previous discussions, we've kind of agreed that these seem like things that are worth addressing, and trying to figure out how we can address them. And the goal for today was to translate some of those into language as to what would actually, when rubber hits the road, what might we actually change. So here I've got some proposals, and Lisa and I have been talking back and forth trying to get some of these things pinned down and see what might work. And I've been also looking at other committees and seeing what their rules and bylaws say, and see if there's some way we can kind of borrow some language from them. So the first one is with term limits. Right now we have no term limits, and it seems there's a general consensus. Term limits are a good thing. They get diversity, and we kind of expand the pool. And this would probably, really in this case, currently would only affect me, but that's fine. And that's long term. I think it's good to have people rotate in. What I'm proposing with this is we'd follow what the Parks Commission does actually. And theirs, they only allow people to serve for 2 3-year terms, and then they have to take at least 1 term off, and they can reset the clock. And so that's seems like a reasonable way to do things. And when I proposed that last time, it seems like people were amenable to that. So if you could scroll down a little bit, Stephanie.
Yep.
I've essentially chosen that, or proposed this as we'd add a new section to membership, which would be following the PAC format, which is no person has served on PMAC continuously for 6 years shall be eligible for reappointment to PMAC until 3 years have elapsed after his or her service has ended. And so pretty straightforward. And so that's a pretty clear way of adding that in. Again, with this too, that if we're going to be at the point of kind of wordsmithing. And so if you've got wording changes and things like that, then we can start working through those. But I just wanted to make sure that, this process will take a while. And so we're just going to work through proposed language. What will happen with this too is that once we approve through this, once we get to something, then we'll have to still submit it to the city. So the lawyers there it's also within that legal context. So if we approve it, it's not a done deal, but it's one step of the chain. So that's what I'm proposing for that. Any first on this one, any thoughts, opinions, suggestions?
My only comment was, is the wording going to be clear enough if somebody enters as a fill-in?
Mhm.
So that was the only thing I was concerned about, that it's that we were thinking it would be those 2 3-year terms, like in PMAC, because we often do have people drop off partway through their terms.
Definitely. And so I think what, at least my understanding, and I was trying to figure out how did they capture that. And so at least for the strictness of the language, is no person who has served continuously for 6 years shall be eligible for reappointment.
Okay. Okay.
And so that could be if someone started early in there, people could actually serve longer, in terms of if they were like introduced in year 1 for a 1-year term and then had another 1 year, then they could get another 3 years. So they actually have 7 years. So,
Right.
But they'd only have 2 full appointments. So minimum 6 years, they wouldn't be eligible for reappointment until that time has elapsed.
Okay.
So I think it actually captures it. But yeah, I was worried about that too. Okay. Okay.
Thanks.
So then moving on, point 2 is the conflicts of interest, in terms of we have a statement on conflicts of interest, but how they are actually applied is not so clear in terms of how we're supposed to disclose them. But there's no kind of clear mechanism for that. We all do sign something for conflict of interest during our appointment, but that's the only time that is, and it's not an annual process, and it's listed in there as an annual process. So what I'm proposing is, it seems like within the language of the rest of the document, that January is kind of an organizational meeting. So what I'm proposing with this is that the market manager will essentially send out a solicitation which has a disclosure for conflict of interest, just exactly the same thing the city gives us, and that that will be filled out by everyone beforehand, and we'll disclose that and to the market manager, and the market manager then will communicate that back to us as a body, if there are, what the conflicts are, just so that I think it's important not only the manager is aware, but the whole body is aware, in terms of, if like, hey, this is an issue that, just so we can all kind of help remind each other, like, hey, well, that I at least bring up the discussion, trying to be as transparent as possible and as public as possible about what these, if there are conflicts. And the thing here is, it's, people do have conflicts sometimes, and that's okay. I'm just making sure that we handle them appropriately, and that we know what they are, and that we're not hiding them. So we haven't had any problems with that on this committee but I've heard others that have. So it seems like a good thing to develop our process and make sure that we've got clarity there. Thoughts, opinions, adjustments for this? So more or less what I'm proposing is that we're essentially adding in some language for each year before the Januaryzational meeting, we'll include this written annual disclosure, because right now it just says we'll complete it. Where? So making clear what it is, and the endpoint of any reported conflicts will be shared with the commission by the market manager in January. So as to kind of make it explicit, kind of what our timeline is. So we've got that. If you guys have a question for Stephanie too, as the market manager, does that seem like a reasonable process? I don't want to make it too onerous, but it seems pretty light. But
yeah, I think that's fine, and I think it can get sent out with maybe information about the vote coming up, or yeah, it's very, very easy.
Okay, great.
Right.
Okay, so if you could scroll down then, Stephanie.
So far.
Further down. So that's the disclosure
number 3, okay.
Number 3, yes.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So there's the third issue was the member as petitioner. So one of the intrinsic things that we do have within the conflicts of interest of this body is that it's made up of both city folk and of vendors. And vendors have an inherent conflict of interest in some ways, in terms of that they're speaking about rules that might affect them. And so that's desirable that we have their voice. It's kind of by design. But as one of the sub rules within Article 9 says that, it's listed here, that a member shall not be heard before the commission as a petitioner, representative petitioner, or as a party interested in a petition during the member's term, which could be in kind of, it depends. If you view that as that any of the vendors can't be heard, well, then what if the members actually do have a need or a question or some issue that comes before them that does directly affect them? Do they have to not be on the board? Do they have to resign from the board in order to actually bring an issue up front? Or if there's some conflict that arises, it's unclear given the structure we have. And so what I'm proposing is, if you look at the other sections, there are mechanisms within this body already, sections 4, 5, and 6, for how to handle a conflict of interest. And essentially it is, if everyone knows that there's a conflict of interest, that person recuses themselves during that part, they don't have the ability to participate in the discussion, and they don't have the ability to vote, but they could appear as a petitioner, and that would be so that gives them a mechanism already in place. So it seems like for this body, the simplest thing for my view, the corrected is just to delete section 9 and kind of allow sections 4, 5, and 6 to handle the weight of that conflict. And again, with the adjustment to the annual disclosure, making sure we all know who has conflict and that we can all act as the groups for that. And if it's ambiguous, then how the conflict of interest also provides mechanism for that we vote. And if someone feels they don't, but we do, then the group wins. They still can't participate. So it's got fail safes built into it, but it seems reasonable to eliminate section 9 to me. Thoughts, any conflicts or concerns or changes? This one's a pretty.
I think it makes sense. And I think you're right. It's somewhat redundant. If we already have a conflict of interest, why do we have this additional thing, which is basically creating a conflict of interest?
Exactly. And particularly for our body. And not every body has this structure,
right.
But we intrinsically do.
Right.
So, and so might be a slight little wiggling around because there's actually a section 10. So we'd have to close the gap or keep just a missing section. I don't know if that's not a substantial issue, but that's one that we just have to figure out.
Peter, is this sort of same language in any of the other bylaws that you've looked at? I'm just wondering if it's boilerplate from the city.
That's a good question. I don't remember seeing it. I don't remember looking for it though.
Okay.
So I will look that up to make sure to see what that is.
The only reason I was mentioning it is because, as the changes get sent to the legal team to review them, it might just be worth putting a note in explaining why we wanted to strike this. Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I can see where it could come, it makes a lot of sense in certain situations. There's planning and zoning. There are some where if you could have a really toxic situation where someone who's on the board also is a petitioner, and that they're constantly coming at odds with that, and that's So so I'll check through and make sure, see what that is, and if there is some clarity that comes from that. So, and again, if it had to stay, that's fine. It creates kind of an ambiguity that we're not really following that rule in some ways, and that if we did encounter a situation, we don't have guidance as to how to handle that. So I'd like to clarify the path and simplify it if possible.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. I just wanted to anticipate if legal says, why are you doing this?
Exactly. No, I think that's a good idea. So it's providing a little bit of a narrative around that to explain it. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Well, also just to FYI, anytime there is a recommendation for changes, I send a memo with explanation.
Okay.
So that already happens. But yes, good point.
Yeah. Okay, then section 4, which is probably the largest structural change for this, is that currently we have 5 members our commission, and that it makes us one of the smallest in the city. If you go through and look at them, that most of them are larger, and we're not kind of pulling at the brain trust as much as possible, or connecting as many communities, or that like today too, that we have a small group, and that if 1 or 2 people are missing, that it can really both limit the discussion and also just limit our ability to operate. And same thing with creating commissions and things like that too. So, or subcommittees. So the idea with this is to add 2 more members. So we'll still have an odd number. We'll have 7. So we'll have a tiebreaker. And that one of them we discussed last time as it seems like there's all the sense in the world to make it as another vendor, and potentially as just a vendor at large, which could include a daily and annual food artisan, anyone. So it's not, we have one specifically for annuals, we have one for dailies, but this way it would be just another voice and another vendor voice, another market, someone at the market. So that one seems pretty non-controversial. The question is, if we have the 7th member, who should they be? And so I've got some proposals with it. So the first part is easy in terms of at the revision of section 1 in membership, as we just change it from 5 to 7. So if you scroll down, Stephanie.
Yep.
We'll have 1 member at large from any group at the market, but then this 1 other person. And so here are some ideas that you guys had and that I've had subsequently in looking through these other bodies too, is that one of them is we could have another additional vendor. And so then in that case, we would have to give a 4-7 majority of vendors on the commission, which in some ways makes sense in terms of they are the most interested in the rules and they know the most about the rules, and that's a lot of what we discuss. So that's there's a lot of reason associated with that. We could further specify maybe some kind of vendor, if we wanted to specify it for an artisan or a newer vendor or someone who, some other smaller group that we want to get their voice in. The question is that, will that be possible to fill? Will it be harder to fill? Will that pose other problems in terms of kind of making sure we conform what that group is, or how do we do that? I'm not sure. And it's a question. The other side of it is to include another artisan, an Ann Arbor citizen market customer, and that's possible. That works. There are many more of them than there are vendors, so that might be an easier pool to pull from. There's an argument to be made that it comes back to a question of what PMAC is for. If PMAC is for vendors managing themselves, then having more vendors there. If it's a liaison between the city and this community of Ann Arbor with the Ann Arbor Farmers Market, maybe having more communities members on that makes more sense. And that reflects a little bit of ambiguity about our role and about our mission, as to who are we serving, what is our mission. And we'll get to that at the end, but that's just to highlight that issue. The third idea, which is a new one that I was working through, is to actually again follow the model of PAC that the Parks Commission has 9 members, and of those, 2 of them are from the city, are from the city council actually. So like from their parent organization. So one way to, and in some ways that makes sense in terms of the decision body kind of knows what the upper body is doing, such that they actually have some cross information. And so one idea is we could get a member who's on another board to co-join with us as a member, which might actually help just for injecting more kind of DNA about how other organizations work, but also potentially of giving some of our ideas more leverage of crossing across boundaries. And so, the logical one would be actually take a member of PAC and one of them be on our board too. That would be cool. The problem is that's a small population. There are other members here which do touch on some of the other or groups. These are some of the public ones which might have relevance for us, like city planning, design review, energy commission, or Greenbelt advisory. Those are, and you can also see from that most communities are larger than ours. But that if we expanded that population, then we might, if we had someone working through there, that would allow kind of more interworking, less siloing of knowledge and of application. So that could be a good one. Again, recruiting might be a little more challenging, but it's a very defined list. So that's a different idea. Do people have thoughts on these kind of broad 3, or is there a number 4 that I'm not listing that I'm not coming in there?
I think that the idea of having a member of another board is really interesting, Peter. Thanks for bringing that up. I guess the other possibility that's related is just to have a member at large. So it could be from any of the vendor, citizen, neighbor, customer categories, to just leave it open-ended as well.
Yeah, so one possibility is just having the broadest category of a catch-all in that way.
Right.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts there?
I guess I haven't really given that part of it any thought yet.
Okay.
I would definitely have an opinion on it, but I don't know what it is right now.
Sounds good. Well, it's in the document, so then kind of look through that and see what. How about you, Stephanie? Do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I kind of like either the one that's sort of the at-large everyone, or I really like the additional member that's on some other board or council, because I know Greenbelt, they have a council member on there too. And I think it also would help us not get forgotten about as much, with like a 15-member commission, they have a lot of attention they can be generating. Whereas with us, yeah, if it's like if one person or if we are looking to fill a seat and then one person doesn't show up, like that's great. We can have this conversation, but that's all that we can do right now. So those are the two options that I like the most. But yeah, I really like the at-large vendor for spot 6 as well.
Oh, actually, and I was talking about at-large anybody, so it could be from any of the
Sure, that would be
categories.
additional. That would be for spot 7.
Yeah.
Where 6 would be the
Oh,
at-large
sorry.
vendor.
Yeah.
So 6 is definite. We've got a vendor in
Yes,
there. I think that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, I tend to agree. I feel like it always seems strange to me that people that aren't at market every day could overrule the people that are. That always seemed confusing. And again, this is not the makeup that this body has always had either. So I think that's been in flux too. So yeah, it makes sense to me.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the one thing that Peter and I had talked about when we were looking over the rules is there is that stipulation about being part of the city of Ann Arbor, which I think is to make sure the commission's representing the taxpayers too and things like that. And Stephanie, I know you said for vendors that there's an exemption, but I think we should be mindful of that since most of the vendors live outside the city limits, that we need to make sure that there's representation from folks that are voting. I mean, I know there are some vendors that live within the city limits of Ann Arbor. So that might solve that problem, but it was another thing that we were grappling with as we were thinking about who another commissioner could be.
Right. And as far as I know, they just have to have a unanimous vote when the appointment process happens. And that's how they get around being a resident or not.
Okay.
And that's for across all commissions, not just us.
And who's the vote from?
When the city council.
Okay.
Because when it's basically the mayor says, like, I'm nominating this person, and then they vote on it. And it's just got to be unanimous for a non-city resident. It's at least my understanding. They might have changed it.
I think that's what it says in our rules too, is that, and it has to be from the candidate. It has to be, I think that is actually in our bylaws too. So. Great. Okay, so then the last issue, which maybe Lisa can lead on to, is that kind of comes back to this question of what is our mission in terms of who are we, how do we connect these things? Because if we're trying to figure out who should be in these boards, well, it's who are we representing with what goal? And there are some language around it, but it's kind of how much of that is associated with just the farmers market stuff, or how much is associated with parks, and what we want to be. So Lisa came up with found some comps for other areas. If you want to walk through those, Lisa.
Yeah, part of this came up, and we didn't show this, but it is the statement of purpose of the advisory commission, and then thinking about the representation on the commission. And also, Stephanie, this was something that Eric had asked about when he first joined the commission, whether there was a mission statement. And I remember wondering the same thing when I joined the commission also. Thinking about, we are part of the city, and then we're under parks. So I just pulled their mission statements, and then randomly I looked up Ann Arbor Farmers Market mission statement, and this popped up on a volunteer website. And so I just wanted to put it in there because it does say approved at the bottom. So I don't know where it came from.
No idea. I've never seen it before.
I know,
it's
but
interesting.
But it is interesting, but it looks like there was some very thoughtful consideration about the mission statement. And I'm not saying we have to adopt it, but this is, if we want to think about a mission statement, or in sort of thinking about the purpose as part of the document of the purpose of the commission and part of the bylaws, that one, is this the place for a mission statement? And then again, this was just pulling together something, because when I've worked on mission statements before, it's always useful for me to see examples of things. So clearly this isn't going to get resolved tonight, but
Right.
we just wanted to bring it up in part if thinking about whether the bylaws are appropriate place for a mission statement, especially as we discuss the beginning parts, which have the purpose of the commission in them. And if you have a mission statement, it helps you think about your purpose in a more clear, directed way.
So yeah, and it's helpful to have these listing out, and I think it is a question. Some of the bylaws do have a more clear mission statement. Ours has more mechanical in terms of kind of who we report to and what kind of the broad structure things are, but not so much conceptual. So it's a question as to whether we want to include something in here or craft something. The question too is, if we do, what do we do with it, and how much does it actually guide us? And if it's just a navel gazing exercise, that's not worth it. But if it is something that really is useful and we can have a place and it guides our decisions in an important way, then that would be very helpful. So all right, so I think that's all we've got for this. What I'll do is that if people, if people do have additional comments, send those to me as to what we'll do, and then I'll kind of come back with a somewhat more narrow set of language, particularly around the fourth issue. That seems like that's the one that we just need to flesh out, and then we'll move forward. Sound good?
Great.
Yeah, and then when Peter and I were looking at the rest of the bylaws, a lot of the rest of it is nitty gritty, but we thought we'd want to do these bigger issues up front, and then
Sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter, for taking all that, for putting all the pieces together. All right, so if anybody has any comments, they can send them to Peter for prepping more for the next meeting. All right, so the next thing is the producer only subcommittee report.
Yeah, and this one is where B and C sort of bleed together. It's going to segue into that because that did come up in the course of that meeting. So last week we had a meeting Wednesday at Market, and we had a pretty good turnout. We had about 15 vendors there in person, about 4 or 5 on the phone, and then all Market staff was present for this conversation. There was a lot of people that, were there to observe. We're just interested in sort of learning a little bit more about what it was. Some people wanted to talk about inspections and the process that was happening and how that is somewhat confusing, and having definitions about, what the inspectors were looking for. We distributed a copy of what the inspection report looks like to give people some clarity there. There was other people that said, they really, really love the producer only aspect of the market, and they think that's such a strong thing and wants to make sure that keeps going, which of course, we have no intention of removing the producer only part. It's just a question of making it clear and making sure that it's we have a meaningful way of enforcing it that doesn't become overbearing, that doesn't make it really too difficult to actually pull off based on staff hours and our financial resources for the market. There was a conversation that was sort of specific to plants and people wanting to know the details about, or wanting inspectors to know the details about what's, how long is reasonable from when you may be buying a plant to when you are selling that plant. And how certain things, based on what they are, can be ready very quickly, whereas other things take a lot longer, and what that could look like. And then, so that was sort of the main conversation about the producer only. I'm not sure we necessarily, resolved anything or got to goal setting or anything, but it was a really good check-in with people to see sort of where people were at. I think it was good also for some people to talk with us about, how we decide who comes to the market. Because I think a lot of times there's just assumptions being made without the information filling it in. So there's a lot of incorrect assumptions that sort of get out in the air. And I think that also leads to this issue of people being worried that there are resellers or things that are being done. And, obviously we have not caught anybody since I've been here. I know there have been cases in the past where people were removed from the market due to specific incidences here. And it seemed to be kind of two camps. One was like, well, let's go ahead and inspect multiple times a season for one vendor. And others were like, well, no, maybe we should be more leading from a place of trust a little bit more. And it shouldn't be that we're spending all of these market resources to try and sort of over complicate our inspection process or make it very, very involved. And, it was kind of going back and forth on that. But, there was also people saying they wanted the inspector to be more knowledgeable and about certain specific things. And that's, again, the solution we've already put into place with Alex, expanding his inspection of farms in particular and greenhouse operations. There were a few side conversations. A lot of people didn't want to talk just about the producer only thing. A lot of people wanted to talk about how they felt like there was too many food vendors joining the market. And there was other people that, were worried that when the city changes rules, it could be less than optimal. And then I'm trying to think what else. There was a few more, and because I wrote down some notes. And then also there was the conversation too about, what's the difference between a producer and a distributor, or, what happens if your business becomes really large and then you have multiple outlets or you're selling to like large Meyer stores or stuff like that. Is that something that do you graduate beyond the market if you become like a multi I don't know the word for it, like a distributor perhaps? And then also the other question that came up was about co-packing, right? Like, so say you would sell your salsa recipe to a factory and they made it for you. Is that actually producer only? Most people would think that it's not. But it, brings up this question. So I guess really a lot of the stuff that came out of the meeting is the more we try to clarify and the more we try to have these specifics, the more questions come about and the more gray areas that are created. And do we really want that? Is that the spirit of what we want here? And again, so that was sort of like the preliminary conversation there. And then the side conversation kept trying to break out as well about the 4 stalls. And I said, come bring your comments here because that's outside the scope of the producer only meeting. And that's my quick summary of about a meeting that went on a little bit over an hour, which Stephanie helped facilitate as well.
Great.
So I don't know, Jeff, if you wanted to add anything because you were present. Did I forget anything?
No, that pretty much sums it up, I believe.
Okay.
Great. Well, I'm glad you had the meeting. It sounds like those meetings are a good thing for everybody to come and communicate and things like that. So I guess one of my questions is there another one planned?
I think so. I mean, it wasn't anything sort of officially scheduled at the time because it was also very, very hot that day. That was one of the days where it was like 80 and the construction was too loud. So we had to be on the other side of the office, like right in the sun. So perhaps that is why the scheduling didn't occur because people were melting.
It makes for short meetings, efficient meetings.
Right. But as far as I know, it was a good preliminary thing, but, we didn't necessarily, as I said, there was no goal setting happening. There was no next steps really discussed. But I guess the next step is to follow up with people and see, do we really need to change what we are doing? Or do we just need to tweak our inspection process? Do we not really need to specify within the rules, or is it just we need to alter how we are enforcing them or how we are inspecting? And I think that's probably something that will come about in the next meeting being discussed.
So one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about places that scale up or change, and also thinking about how often do you need to inspect the artisans?
Right.
Is there a mechanism in place where people could say, look, things are changing, I am going to scale up, or an artisan wants to add a new product? Is there a mechanism in place that people can say, here's how I'm changing? And then is there something that, there can be a conversation about how that fits within the rules of the market of who a producer is or how a producer changes, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we have a vendor update form. So anybody that wants to, add a new staff person or add a new product, they have to tell us about it and we have to approve it. And if it's something that's like a completely different category or needs inspection, it will trigger a secondary inspection. So that's how it already works. But yeah, so market staff has to sign off on it. And then that's the thing. Does everyone tell us every single product that they're bringing? I don't really care if it's like they're bringing a different flavor of a scone, right? It's more like they went from making scones to making chocolate or decided to be a farmer. Things change like that. That's really more what's triggering the inspections. Is at least as I can tell, but yeah, that there is a mechanism there for that already.
Okay, well,
that's pretty much all I had for that item.
All right, well, that sounds great. So got about 15 minutes left, so let's talk about 4 stalls.
All right, here we are. So I'm not sure if people had the chance to maybe revisit Carlene's letter from before, but this is a conversation that really just came about a couple weeks ago, or I guess right before last meeting. So it was a little more than a couple weeks ago, but recently. And I think from what I've heard from some people, all the commentary I've gotten this week from vendors is what I presented, right? People are not in favor of it, as a counterpoint to those that said that they were. There were some people at Wednesday's meeting that said they were in favor. There was other people that said they were not. And I know Jeff mentioned last time it would be really great to see, a survey done, to see what the level of interest is, to see how many people want to be engaged in this, if this is something that's really coming about. But I would love to echo Stephanie's point. I think logistically, this would be very difficult to pull off. A lot of it is because, many people with 3 stalls are right next to another person with 3 stalls. And I don't see how, without like mass retirements and moving things around, how we can really make this equitable for people. If we were to go in that direction. I also, want to echo your point you made last week, Peter, that you feel like if there was a lot of 4 stalls everywhere, is it going to be harder to find the smaller farms? Right. And I think there's also that question too, where there were certain comments given last meeting from Jake Gates in particular, who's saying, as the next generation taking over, he felt like he really needed more space. But on the flip side of that is, what about all the other beginning farmers that don't have an established family already there, that maybe don't have as much space as the Gates family already does have? And I just wanted to point out that Carlene was able to get a 4th stall last year for a large portion of the year. Yes, it wasn't, an annual permanent stall. It just so happened to be because of where one of their stall locations are, they could have a sidewalk spot. But I think that's another thing that we need to talk about. It's not just, a 4 stall is sort of the magical solution. I think a lot of it too is, some people, are they maximizing the 3 stalls that they do have? right? Is there a different way that they could tweak a display that could maybe make it more full, right? Is it perhaps better, instead of just using, just to give it a complete example, to have like pumpkins on the ground or flowers on the ground or something like that? Would it make more sense to have a table there and then also things underneath? Like, would that, you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of questions that I have as well about just sort of display strategies as well. And there are a handful of vendors that I feel like really have maximized their displays and are doing this, but others that haven't. So I think that, to me, is a really big piece of this question. And then on top of it as well, it seems to me that a lot of this is coming about because people are worried there's people retiring, and there's worried that there aren't people. But, you know, as I said, we already brought 15 new people on. We're probably going to have to turn away another 15. So we're not in a situation where we really have a ton of space. You know, all told, if we have all of the retirements from last year and this year combined, we'll maybe have max 8 stalls open. And that's, again, if we have all of them, if all of this stuff continues as we're assuming. And in a usual time period, that would mean 4 dailies would get their seniority. But does this mean then we would have to say to those 4 vendors that would get the seniority, no, I'm sorry, you know, you can't move up this year? You know, how would that work also? You know, it's a question that I have. And I think I've also heard from some of the artisans that they're somewhat concerned that, you know, they haven't necessarily even locked in their second stall for everyone. Or I think it is more locked in than they maybe feel, but I think they also feel anxious, that they feel like they just got this thing they've been waiting for a really long time, and then the goalpost has been moved. Or at least that's what was communicated to me at recent markets. So I think that's something else to keep in mind. But my main thing is just logistically, I find it very, very difficult to pull off. I'm not sure how this would work without, you know, people being left out, right? Because if we change the rule and say you can have 4 stalls, but then it turns into, oh no, you can't, because where your stalls are, like, there's no space for you. You're next to a walkway, or, you know, you have just as a more senior person next to you that will never move over. You know, like, again, I'm still not sure what that looks like. And I know that, Jeff, I think the comments you gave last time, Jeff, were helpful in terms of it could look like it does for the 3rd stall, that eventually things get put together. But logistically, if someone gets a 3rd stall, even if their stall is somewhere else, when it comes to market day, they're expecting those 3 stalls to be together. So then I just worry that it would create a situation. People are like, well, I have 4 stalls, but we actually can't physically put that together. And do we really want a situation where we have split stalls all over the place, where it's, you know, the vendor has a base here and then another stall over there? I just feel like that can get incredibly complex, especially if we talk about, you know, parking behind the stall, and access to that becomes really, really, really complicated. So to me, it's like, I see it as kind of like opening up Pandora's box, but for very little gain, at least, is how I can see it from just a pure logistical standpoint as of right now. So that's my thoughts based on what I have been told by other vendors. But I agree, we should survey people.
I think the survey is a great idea. And hypothetically, Stephanie, is there any way for, and I don't know if this would ever happen, but if a farm starts downsizing, if they could reduce their number of stalls?
Of course. Yeah, that can happen anytime. Okay. They just decide the next year, oh, I only need 2 stalls this year, so then 1 becomes relinquished. Yeah.
Okay.
That's very easy to do. That doesn't involve any sort of rule change at all.
Yeah, it was more out of curiosity.
Right.
I guess on a related question too, is that, like, I know some folks who wanted a 4th stall have been using a 4th stall as an annual or as a daily. And so filling that in, and it becomes a question as to, I know those aren't usually contiguous, they're on some other site, but is that are they not getting their fourth stall when they want it? Does that happen? Is that something that if someone has is an annual with 3 stalls and they decide I need a fourth and I'll take it as a daily for the day, how often are they not able to do that?
Right. Well, that's kind of my point, is like, based on the way that the rules are currently written, you can only have a fourth stall if it's available after everyone is placed. Right. And that's the other thing I worry, that by people saying, oh, well, I have 4 stalls, I'm an annual, that will bump people that are daily vendors. But the other thing is, like, how is it going to bump annuals? Like, I don't see, in my mind, I don't understand how this will work, because most of our large stalls are, one next to the next to the next to the next, with maybe one stall in between. So say they both want that stall, who gets it? Is it all based on seniority? It just seems to me like it will create a system that's even more unfair. But that's just me. But in terms of daily status vendors, I don't think they usually get more than 2 stalls. I don't know. I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure if that's something that's like been written down or if it's just a practice. But daily status vendors aren't usually getting more than 2.
I guess I'm asking for the annual vendor who has 3 stalls, who might want a fourth under the current rules, like last year, that then they request it and they can get it as one of a floater after everyone else is chosen. That how often are they unable to get anything? Does that happen? Does it happen very often? Do you know?
Well, what do you mean by unable? I think that's where I'm getting confused.
So if they want a fourth stall for that particular day, then it can. How many of them do they ask for it, but they're not able to get it because the market's full, or that there just is none available?
It's sort of uncommon to ask, unless it's something like, there was a cancellation and all of a sudden the stall next to you becomes open. And that's how it sort of was traditionally before we changed the sign-in process. Is it like, hey, if someone's unclaimed, it would go by seniority, and then the most senior person could get that extra stall, and so on and so forth. It's been, kind of in between these, because a lot of times, like, I'll know if someone's not coming, so I can say, oh, hey, Tadasha, do you want this 4th stall today for your wreaths during Christmas time? And then they will pay the daily fee right there. So that's, I think, the other part that's confusing, and I think is confusing to other people, is that mechanism still exists and has always existed. So if there's a 4th stall and it's available, you can get it. That has not changed. It's just, I think the question here is like making it a permanent assigned stall where you're required to pay yearly for it. It's important as well to point out, it's about $800 to get that 4th stall. So it's quite a bit more expensive as well as you aggregate up. And that one tends to be, very, very expensive. So it really is only for people that really need it as it stands right now. Because again, you're paying for it per day as it is now. So even if they wanted to pay for it yearly, it's quite a big jump up of money from 3 to 4 stalls. I think it's like $2,400 or something like that for the stall fee for those that were grandfathered in at 4 stalls. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that does. So it sounds like it generally, there is a mechanism where people can, if there's a 4th stall available and they want it, then they can get it on a daily basis, but they don't have it permanently assigned to them unless they had it grandfathered in.
Correct.
Those few exceptions. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and like Wednesday, probably very easy to pull off, but do people need a higher volume of product on Wednesday? Maybe not. Or it depends on what the season is. So there's that. And again, I think it boils down as well to just stall placement. There are some people, based on where they are located within the market, that if they might be in a corner spot, they're able to have a whole other side of frontage that other people can't. And usually we do charge more for that, to have that corner spot. But then it also wades into this question that came up during the sign-in process conversations about, like, what is a parking spot? Is it for a car? Is it for produce? What does it look? Is it for backstock? What can that look like? Are there some people that are just sort of doing a workaround if they're not getting another stall? Are they just like putting a table or putting product in that parking spot and expanding their real estate exponentially, which people that don't have a parking spot behind their stall can't do? So there's all sorts of questions. But I think Alex made an interesting point when we were talking about this earlier, where he was like, I'd like to see everybody try to make the map now, and then also try to make it with four stalls. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. I didn't have time, but I wanted to create a visual that would show everyone what the market looks like with every single permanent stall filled. And again, obviously there's certain people that don't come every time, but I think that's something that, people really need to understand. Like, yes, just because we had 3 retirements, it doesn't mean everyone's retiring, doesn't mean people aren't interested anymore. And we still are bringing on farms. And that's another thing I pointed out during the meeting. We have 62 farms on our roster right now, 63 if you include the rebranding of Fluffy Bottom. And I think there were certain people that were asking for additional stalls that they were surprised by that. They were like, oh, really? I didn't know. And partly that's because of seasonality, right? Not everyone's there all the time. Or people get used to like what it looks like in the winter and thinking, it's where is everybody? But I think that's a thing we need to keep in mind, is that all the stuff I've been talking about at succession plans and whatever, like that's a long-term planning. That's not a right now, we're in a crisis. And I just did want to specify and clarify that we still have, majority of our vendors are still farms of all stripes and greenhouses.
I guess I'm wondering where the conversation goes next.
Right.
Seems like there's lots of ideas. And Stephanie, I guess, can you synthesize a pros and cons list for us? Yeah. Peter, I don't know if you have any other suggestions on sort of managing things.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a matter of just making sure that I think getting the data from what the vendors
survey
are thinking, that's a kind of a key step for that.
Yeah.
But I echo some of the concerns I heard too, in terms of it just seems like we're looking for the long term too, and making sure that, and having diversity of farms and having people have, and hearing too that people can have 4 stalls currently. It's just not in quite the configuration that they would want, and that's okay. Well, it's kind of, how do we trade that cost with the benefit of having a diversity of more farms to kind of allow on our roster, and more annual. I'm hearing too, actually, the artisan discussion has at least informs me too about that too, in terms of how do you get there. Are a lot of people who are, getting annual status is really important, is really valuable for people for making these a viable business. And if this kind of locks in even more of the annual slots, then that leaves out even more people, which they lose that security and certainty that they would have as an annual vendor. So that's a kind of society cost, or a community cost for this community. But it's also a benefit for those people who would really benefit from that. But it's, again, how many people are we serving with that, and how many people will be negatively impacted by that? I think those are but I think recognizing that both are true, that there could be some people who are genuinely benefiting from that. That would be, how big is that benefit? It doesn't seem huge to me, but I'm also not a vendor, so I don't. I know I'm not really the most appropriate to speak on that, but at the same time, I can see some cost too for the overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have more capacity for vendors to weigh in more of even like a neutral way, because I think, it's different when a vendor comes around and says, I have this letter, sign on to it, than it is from some, more neutral data collection mechanism like a survey. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan.
And again, I can also see it from both sides. And I would really love to see people exhausting all the options with display design first, which I don't feel like I'm really seeing. amongst the signatories, particularly of the letter. So I think that's another thing to be aware of too.
And the other knob too that I think was mentioned last time too is the knob of, well, if we did have the fourth, you could make it just really expensive and really expensive-er than
Right.
and then
Right.
that's like, okay,
Which
if you
basically
really
already
are
is.
going to use it, and
Yeah.
then it's something that's really important, that it's thousands of dollars for that fourth stall.
Sure.
And so, but that in some ways
Right.
that can be equivalent to saying no. You know?
Right. Right. Yeah, that might just weed people out that really don't need it. They like the idea of it, but like, well, do I really want that investment? I'm not sure. Probably not. And that's another reason why, like, I kind of like how it is on a daily basis, because I think that's more in the spirit of it. You know, if it's peach season and your table is overflowing and you want that one table right then and there, because it's that time of year, that's great. And the other thing too is like, are you going to need a four stall 15 times? Because that's in essence what you would be paying for, the equivalency of, you know, the value there. So that's the other thing. Maybe you need it 5 times, but not that many times. So then again, it wouldn't necessarily make sense financially to pay all that extra money too. So there's a lot of factors that I think maybe haven't been fleshed out as of yet.
Great. Thank you. Lots of good points discussed. So seems like we're ready to move on to item H, which is the new business, non-agenda items. And I don't have anything.
Nothing here.
Great. So let's move on to the second public comment.
All right. Would anyone like to comment? I see a raised hand. Go ahead, Carlene. Yep.
All right. This is Carlene again. I'd just like to review a couple things about the 4 stalls. Number one of the points of discussion that started that whole conversation is the fact that right now we have some unassigned stalls, at least 4, maybe 5. And that was after the stall move up last year. I know they changed it because of people who have announced they're not coming back. But before that, there were at least 4 stalls. The next one is, I've been talking to some vendors too, and I don't believe there's even 7 or 8 that would want to pay the extra or need to have an additional stall. But if in the event that all these reasons we can't have a permanent 4th stall, I think it would only be right that you could allow, since it says right in there that on Wednesdays you can have 4 stalls, everybody can because there's so many empty stalls. And it's not hard to do the math, giving people 4 stalls in a row on Wednesday. And then not everybody's in a spot, but some of us are in a spot where, well, ours is the sidewalk, which isn't really a stall that we utilize quite most of the time in the summertime. So I ended up paying over $1,100 for a 4 stall last year, which is significantly more than anybody else paid for a 4 stall. So what about letting us, even though we wouldn't have a 4th stall, do like the daily vendors who don't have any stalls but are allowed to pay for the annual fee so that they don't have to pay more than anyone else. And then I also think it's interesting to know that some people who have 4 stalls and are transitioning their business and eventually will only be able to transfer 3 stalls, but in the process, new people who've never been to market get to use 4 stalls in a row. That's all. Thank you.
I don't know which new people that is, but that's okay.
Think about those that are in the beginning processes of transitioning stalls.
Sure, and the way that the rules are written, that's okay.
I understand
the transfer.
I understand that. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carlene.
Okay.
Thanks, Carlene.
Great.
All righty. We talked about a lot of things tonight, so
We did.
I think we're probably ready to adjourn. Unless anybody has anything else to bring up. Okay, great. So thank you very
Yep.
much. It is 7:05. And so we will adjourn the meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Have a
Yeah.
great
Thank you.
evening.
And
See you at
hopefully we can
Market.
get that other position open.
Yes.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
And 2 more.
Right.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.